Hello, my name is Dolores Luna, and the book I chose to read today is called Ghost Ship by Mary Higgins Clark, illustrated by Wendell Miner. And I chose this book today because I think it's rich in vocabulary for students. It holds an actual story that they can learn from more than just a fun book. So this is why I chose this book. Some questions for my students would be, what does the cover tell us about what we're going to read? What does the title tell us about what we're going to read? It says the title is Ghost Ship. So we might be reading about haunted ships. Perhaps we'll be reading about ghosts. Well, let's read and find out. Ghost Ship, a Cape Cod story. Summer had begun, and Thomas was visiting his grandmother, who lived in a very old house in Cape Cod that had once belonged to a sea captain. Sometimes she told him stories about the great sailing ships that had come to Cape Cod many years ago, from all over the world. She told him that in the old days, when a storm suddenly began, a ship trying to reach the harbor would be driven into the rocks and sand, rocks and sandbars, where it would break up and sink. Thomas loved to hear the stories. He wondered about the sea captain who had built this house more than 200 years ago. He wondered if that sea captain ever lost the ship in a storm. He thought about that a lot. One day, Thomas went down the long flight of stairs from the lawn to the beach. He had promised his grandmother that he would not go too near the water until she joined him. His grandmother knew that Thomas would never break his word. There had been a heavy storm the night before. The wind had whipped the waves until they slammed halfway up the stairs before crashing back onto the shore. Now the beach was littered with shells and rocks that had been washed in by the sea. Thomas began to sift sand through his fingers. The sand was damp, but he liked that. Sometimes after a storm, he would find unusual things that had been in the ocean. Now class, what kind of unusual things do you think Sam would find that came up from the waves from the storm? What things do you think you would find? Once he had even found a small ring. His grandmother said it wasn't valuable, but that it looked as though it had been in the ocean for a long, long time. He wondered if after the big storm last night, it was possible that he would find another ring, or maybe he'd come upon an unbroken shell. If he did find one, he would put it up to his ear and listen, because the shells hold the sound of the sea. But then suddenly his fingers felt a hard metal object. He had to dig around it, set it free. It was much heavier than a shell. It looked very, very old. He ran his fingers over it and began to rub the sand and salt from it, but it was like trying to rub cement off a wall. He looked around and reached for a big rock, and he began to try to scrape the crust off whatever it was he was holding in his hand. What do you think he might have found? And then something magical happened. The minute he managed to get down through the sand and salt, the metal object began to glisten, and the rest of the sand and salt got loose and slid away. "It's a belt buckle," Thomas exclaimed. "It's like the one I wore when I was a pilgrim in the Thanksgiving play at school." If he wore a belt buckle like the one he found in a Thanksgiving play, perhaps this belt buckle he found is from what era? "Thou hast found my belt buckle," a polite voice said. "I thank thee kindly. I lost it a very long time ago." Thou and thee. Are those words we use today? I don't think so. What does this tell us about the person, the new person in the story? Thomas looked up. His eyes widened. He could not believe what he was seeing. Standing in front of him on the beach was a boy just about his own age. Thomas blinked, not sure if he was dreaming, yet sure that he couldn't be. He looked down and saw that the belt buckle was now so shiny that it might have been brand new. It was carved with a picture of a ship that had 4 sails that billowed in the wind. He knew he would give the buckle back, but first he wanted to talk to the boy. "My name is Thomas Fleming," he said. He pointed up to his grandmother's house. "My grandmother lives there," he explained. Then, because he wasn't sure what else to say, he explained, "Her house was built by a sea captain. His name was Andrew Hallett." "My name is Silas Rich." the other boy explained. "I had the honor of serving Captain Hallett. He was a very brave man, and truly a great seafarer. I was his cabin boy." Thomas did not even bother to wonder why this boy who had lived so long ago was here. He just wanted to know about Captain Hallett and whether or not he had ever been in a shipwreck. It was late afternoon, and the lighthouse at Chatham could be seen blinking and blinking. Thomas knew it flashed twice every 10 seconds. He pointed to it. "When Captain Hallett built this house in 1752, I know there was no lighthouse here, and I know that many ships crashed coming into harbor. Did that ever happen to him?" 1752. Perhaps that explains to us why Silas says the words thou and thee in the way he speaks. What were the use of lighthouses? What were they meant for? What did they do for sea captains? Or anybody out at sea? Silas sighed. He sat down cross-legged beside Thomas in the sand. "It was a disgraceful and shameful event," he said. "I truly dislike to call it to mind. But I can see thou admire the captain, and I think it would please thee to hear the story. Captain Hallett was a very fine seaman, and because of that some people were very jealous of him. He sailed the oceans with a sure hand. In his ship, the Monomoy, he weathered storms that would have sent other vessels to the bottom of the sea. In the year 1761, he had been away for nearly 2 years, and was expected home. Word had come from smaller vessels that had met him nearing Boston Harbor that he was on his way. Everyone was in great hope for his safe return. He was a giant of a man. Thomas could see the glow in the eyes of Silas Rich. He knew that he had not been wrong when he thought of Andrew Hallett as a hero. "Tell me about him, Silas," Thomas urged. "You see, there's a portrait of him in my grandmother's house. It's out being cleaned right now, but in it he looks so strong and so wise and so fearless. Was he really like that?" Silas did not answer him directly. Instead, he looked over in the direction of the lighthouse. "I love sober light," he said. "Sober light? I don't know what that means," Thomas told him. "Perhaps thou would say twilight or dusk. What I mean is the time just before the sun is totally vanished in the sky. That was the way it was the night Captain Hallett returned from his long voyage. Then suddenly the wind whipped up. It does that. Thou knowest." Thomas moved around a little so that he could face Silas Rich directly. He could sense from the look on the face of his new friend that he was going to hear a story that had never been told before. "My father had gone to sea before I was born. He never returned. But Captain Hallett was always very kind to me. He would take me out on his ship, on his sloop," Silas began. "Sloop?" Thomas asked. "A small vessel. When he was home, he would go out on it and see to his grand ship, the Monomoy, when it was in harbor. My father had been his great friend, and so was I, as he told me, forever dear to him. He promised me that when I reached my 10th birthday, I would be appointed his cabin boy, and sail with him. Thomas was 9 years old. He thought of what his mother would say if he asked to sail away and be gone for as long as 2 years. This is all the story that I'm going to read. But some questions for my students would be, what does Silas' appearance in the story mean to Thomas? Why does Thomas find this belt buckle? Was it coincidental? Perhaps he was meant to find it. What do you think that the conclusion of Silas' story would be? What happened to Captain Hallett? And what role would Silas play in Captain Hallett's story? We have to put prediction into our story reading. Now for some book talk. Some critical thinking strategies that I believe I used during my reading were questioning to understand was one of them. This critical thinking strategy engages the students by having them listen more attentively to what I am reading to them, asking them questions during the reading as well as before and after as I did, helps them to focus on what is going on in the story so they can answer the questions and better comprehend what is being read to them. Another thinking strategy that I used, and I think it ties into the first one, is thinking independently. And that one can be used along with the first one, which is questioning to understand, by having the students think on their own what the answers might be to any questions regarding the story, having them look for it in the text. Another critical thinking strategy would be analyzing meanings of words or phrases, such as when I asked what thou and thee meant, words that Silas used when he was telling Thomas the story. Another book by Mary Higgins Clark that would interest you is called The Magical Christmas Horse. That's obviously would be a fun book for the holidays. The setting of this story, Ghost Ship, is in Cape Cod. I believe that would have been the most appropriate setting for this story for very obvious reasons. The story that Silas is depicting to Thomas is in that time setting, not in that time setting, in that setting. If it would have been in any other part of the world, it might have been a little different. It might have not made as much sense. Let's see, if he had not been there where he was in Cape Cod, he might have never found the belt buckle. You know, it was meant to be there. I want to show you some illustrations, such as, let's see, right here, this illustration. I like this illustration because it shows the transition between childish drawings to a little bit more mature pictures in a book. It's very realistic. Wendell Miner did a good job of showing expression on their faces. Thomas looks very attentive to what Silas is saying. Silas's hand gesture shows how he is explaining something to Thomas. The colors are very realistic to the setting, to the time of the day. This was a really good one. And you can also see that Thomas is a ghost. You can see through Thomas to the beach horizon, which Wendell Miner did a very, very good job of doing that. I'd like to also read, which this page also has a really good illustration, but I'd also like to read a little exciting part of the story where things are getting exciting, keeps the reader wanting to know what's going to happen. So this is a little part of the story that I didn't get to before that I want to read. Where were the Mooncussers and Samuel Lewis? Perhaps a mile away, lighting their lanterns. We began our fire and flamed it higher and higher, but I still feared it would be too late. Captain Hallett would have seen the other lights first. Truly, I was in despair thinking how the captain had built his beautiful home and might never live to see it or his family again. And that was when I knew what I must do. Thomas, come up now. It was his grandmother calling him from the top of the stairs. I just want to pause and explain what's going on here. This is the climax of Silas's story, where he is saving the sea captain who Silas worked for, and that we learned this at the beginning of the story, if I'm not mistaken. And the illustration depicts the past in Silas's story, but they are still in present day time, which is why puts in here, "Thomas, come up now." It was his grandmother calling him from the top of the stairs. So that shows us that we're still in present day time as well, because Thomas can obviously still hear his grandmother calling him. And now going back to Silas's story, Thomas basically ignores his grandmother's call. "What did you do, Silas?" Thomas asked. "I don't want to go until you tell me the rest of the story." Mistress Hallett had come out of the house and was standing on the top step. "Yes?" "I called to her to stand back, and I began to drag logs to the foot of the stairs. My friends understood what needed to be done and yanked and hauled the remaining logs to the stairs." "You set the stairs on fire!" Thomas exclaimed. "Yes, we did. We knew that they would flame high, and if the captain was nearby, he would see the silhouette of his home and know that he was not yet at harbor." "Did it work?" "It was just when the flames began to climb that one of our lads called out, 'He is there! I see the ship!'" And here Wendell Miner does a good job of illustrating the fire with its very vivid colors and realistic colors, showing the intensity of the situation. Oh, Thomas, the brave captain, was heading straight for the beach where the Mooncutters were waiting. More logs, I shouted. We tossed them on. We took off our shirts and threw them on the fire. The flames began to leap to the sky. Then, just as it would have been too late, we saw them in Monomoy change course. Oh, Thomas, the moment of glory and joy when we could discern that it set itself safely to harbor. And then, like a gift from God, as he passed us and the still blazing fire, the captain dipped his sail to give thanks to us. Later, he told me that he could see his home bright, sharp against the sky, and knew that the course he was on would have brought him to doom. And there we read that little exciting part in the story where Silas was in the process of saving the captain that then hired him to be his cabin boy. He basically saved his captain's life and his ship and brought him safely home to his wife and saved the day. Yes, he set the stairs on fire, but he did it to save his captain. And this was the story that I chose. I thought it was very interesting. I thought it was very insightful and something that can really engage the students in critical thinking, as well as appreciating new artwork in books, appreciating these very lively illustrations, learning new words, and engaging them in read alouds to think critically and hopefully encourage them to read more. And that is why I chose Ghost Ships by Mary Higgins Clark. Thank you.